Bienvenidos a Reimaginando nuestro futuro, diálogos sobre el desarrollo en América Latina y el Caribe 2025. Este año, desde el Buró Regional del PNUD para América Latina y el Caribe, nos enorgullecemos de presentar dos informes insignia: el informe sobre desarrollo humano y el informe sobre democracia y desarrollo en la región. Estas publicaciones, independientes pero complementarias entre sí, exploran los puntos de presión que afectan a nuestras democracias y trayectorias de desarrollo, desde el rápido cambio tecnológico hasta la fragmentación social y los desafíos climáticos. A través de los diálogos sobre políticas públicas y las conversaciones sobre democracia y desarrollo que llevaremos a cabo mensualmente, conectamos a la experiencia global con las perspectivas locales, involucrando a expertos, tomadores de decisiones y socios del PNUD en debates colaborativos basados en la evidencia, descubriendo esas válvulas de escape que permitirán liberar la presión y transformar las tensiones en progreso y coexistencia pacífica. Estas series buscan revitalizar la importancia del diálogo y el poder transformador de las políticas públicas para brindar soluciones integrales a los complejos desafíos del desarrollo, como única vía para construir sociedades más inclusivas, productivas y resilientes. Al conmemorar los 60 años del PNUD, en pos del desarrollo humano, los invitamos a sumarse a nosotros para que reimaginemos el futuro del desarrollo en América Latina y el Caribe.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this Caribbean-focused dialogue titled From Hashtags to Action, Youth, Democracy, and Decision-Making in the Digital Age. My name is Dylan Kerrigan. I'm the Peace and Development Officer for the Caribbean region, concentrating on English and Dutch-speaking Caribbean. Across the Caribbean, young people are reshaping what civic participation looks like. They're not necessarily waiting for permission to be part of change. They're creating it in their own ways. Whether through community initiatives, social media activism, or online forums, this generation is using digital tools to question, mobilize, and hold power to account. We've seen this energy in the Leave She Alone campaign, where young people use digital storytelling to challenge gender-based violence and shift public conversations. We see it in Cayenne, the Caribbean Youth Environmental Network, linking youth across islands to advocate for climate justice and sustainability. And just recently, the third Caribbean ICT Youth Network meeting in Kingston under the theme Driving Change, Connecting Futures, brought together young innovators shaping how technology itself can empower inclusion. So digital activism is reshaping civic participation, obviously not just globally, but here in the Caribbean. Yet it's happening at the same time that our data is suggesting that many young people are actually stepping back from traditional forms of participation. In recent elections, it appears that voter turnout amongst young people has been declining across the region. Many have told us they don't feel represented or that democracy doesn't deliver in their daily lives. And yet those same young people are still showing up powerfully online, campaigning, debating, creating, connecting, and reimagining what engagement means. So there's a shift. We're seeing a shift. From the ballot box maybe to the chat box, from rallies to digital movements. And while this does open up incredible opportunities, it comes with real risks. Misinformation, digital exclusion, and surveillance can erode trust and deepen inequalities, particularly for those who are already feeling unheard. This is why it matters that the UNDP and the UN's Pact for the Future place youth at the very center of decision-making. Both recognize that young people are not just beneficiaries of development. They're partners in shaping it, critical thinkers, innovators, and builders of more inclusive digital and democratic futures. Not least, they probably see things that we're not seeing. So as we open today's dialogue, the question is not whether digital spaces matter. They clearly do. But how can we make them safe, inclusive, and meaningful? How do we turn these hashtags into action, like leadership, online energy into real-world change? I think we already have the foundations. I look around, I see CARICOM youth ambassadors, I see national youth parliaments, I'm seeing the UNDP going into communities with the Have Your Say dialogue, such as in Trinidad and Tobago. And all of these show us that young people want democracy to deliver every day through fairness, opportunity, inclusion, and trust. So let's try and center that spirit today, thinking about youth as tomorrow's leaders, not just the observers, thinking about the digital space as a bridge, not a barrier, and thinking about the Caribbean, of course, as a region of creativity, solidarity, and transformation. Thank you for this, and I'm really looking forward to hearing from our panel. So I'm going to just introduce them quickly, and then we'll move on to some questions. Today we have Zinzi Noel, the Director and Public Relations Officer of Advocacy Grenada Incorporated, a National Youth Ambassador and Youth Parliament Senator. We also have Mr. Shaka Sinrose, a representative from the UNDP's Youth Forum in Trinidad and Tobago. And we also have Mr. Kevin Eady, the founder and director of Kev's Politics, and also the executive producer of Polyspace, an interactive social media forum that connected CARICOM PMs, prime ministers, with their constituents using Twitter Spaces. The question is, how are young people across the Caribbean using digital platforms to influence policy and mobilize communities? Zinzi, if you don't mind, I'd like to ask you to come in first and answer this question. Please go ahead. Thanks. Don't forget to introduce yourself as well. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. Again, my name is Zinzi Noel, and apart from being a director and PRO of Advocacy Grenada, Inc., I'm also the UN Youth Advisory Group member for Barbados and the Eastern Caribbean. I advocate for the rights of persons with disabilities, for inclusion, policy, all of those stuff. I'm deeply passionate about youth empowerment, equality, and showing that every young person, regardless of ability, has a voice in shaping the Caribbean we all want to see. Across the Caribbean, young people are using digital platforms to influence policy and mobilize communities in bold and innovative ways. Platforms like TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, and WhatsApp have become more than just spaces for entertainment. They've become virtual town halls where youth raise awareness, educate others, and push for real policy change on issues like climate justice, gender equality, human rights, and disability inclusion. For example, in my own advocacy, I use TikTok, Facebook, and Instagram to share my story and the challenges I face as a person with a disability. Through my posts, I highlight accessibility barriers, speak about inclusion, and show what life is really like living with a disability in the Caribbean. It's not just about telling my story. It's about helping others understand, breaking stereotypes, and showing policymakers why stronger disability policies and representation are so important. And I'm not alone. Across the Caribbean, across the region, young people are using their voices, creativity, and platforms to inspire action, from organizations, online campaigns, and platforms to inspire everyone around them. So this virtual discussion brings governments, officials, and citizens together when you do that. Even movements that start as simple as hashtags often grow into national conversations and community projects. So despite challenges like misinformation and limited internet access, this generation has proven that activism isn't confined to just rallies or press conferences. It's happening online in real time and is shaping how policies are discussed, written, and implemented across the Caribbean. So thank you.
Thank you, Zinzi. Fantastic answer. I really love the bit where you talked about sharing stories and why this is so important, and the need for representation and helping other people to understand those lives that they maybe don't know so well. And I just really want to congratulate you on that kind of use of the online space and representation. And it's so important to also do what you said, get yourself represented and also think about policies, impact policies. I'm really happy and it's really a pleasure to hear what you just said. Thank you. I'm going to move over to my colleague Shaka now. Shaka, I'm asking you the same question. Please feel free to give a little introduction to yourself. You know, how are young people across the Caribbean using digital platforms to influence policy and mobilize communities? Over to you, Shaka. Thanks.
Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Shaka St. Cruz. I am from the UNDP Youth Forum on Justice, Security, and Gender. And I am currently 16 years old and I attend Queen's Royal College, Trinidad and Tobago. Now to get into the question. I like the point highlighted by Ms. Noel saying that social media is the youth's town hall, because it is true that is where young people go to voice their opinion about any matter, any topic, any issue that we have. That's where we go to first. And I believe that that is a great initiative because it helps others to see what they can do. For instance, recently I saw a video where a group of young people were cleaning up Mayara Beach, and I thought that was really great because it shows that others could do something as well, and to continue making the world a better place. Because as a young person, the future is ours to inherit, so we need to take care of it. And social media, we're using it as a tool to connect to others all across the world. And that's a great initiative. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thanks, Shaka. And thanks for pulling out that point, you know, about social media as the youth's, town hall space. I think that's such an important idea for us to really kind of understand and operate in that. And also the idea that, you know, the online examples really help. And I agree with you, man. It's all about, protecting the future and working on the future, because that is the space of young people. And thank for that. I like the idea as well that, you know, social media helps us to see other people trying to help and, you know, do stuff for the environment or climate, and you're doing that. So thank you very much, Shaka. Kevon, I'm going to come over to you now, sir. Please, you know, feel free to give us a little bit of your background, because you seem to be operating in these spaces already, and it sounds very exciting to hear about your work and what you're up to, and offering the same question to yourself, okay? Let me know if you need me to repeat it, but I feel like you heard it a couple of times already.
Yeah. So, hi, I'm Kevon Eady, founder of Kev's Politics. We're based in Barbados, but we've been serving the Caribbean for almost a decade, covering upwards of around 40 regional and international elections over the last 9 years. My background is in political science, but also in international trade policy. And the overarching goal of Kev's Politics is really to not only inform our region, but also to facilitate a platform for our stories to be heard, and doing so while increasing civic engagement among young people across our islands. But to tackle the question at hand, I think that it is very important to underscore that, unlike our colleagues outside of the Caribbean, generally within the Caribbean, young people often have a harder time breaking into traditional political spaces to exert meaningful societal influence. Nevertheless, we've had instances where youth utilize digital means to advance causes. So, for example, here in Barbados, we had the Nelson Must Go movement, which was an online petition led by Alex Downs, calling for the removal of the controversial 207-year-old statue of former British Admiral Horatio Nelson from in front of our Parliament buildings. And Alex and our team, well, I was also part of that team, was successful in encouraging the government to remove the statue following the signature of around 11,000 signatures back in 2020. Similarly, we've seen Life in Leggings in Barbados, where women and later across the region bravely speaking up against gender-based violence within their communities. As I mentioned before, our team at Kev's Politics, for almost a decade, we provided bite-sized information on policy and current affairs to the young people in Barbados and across the wider region, which led to greater civic engagement on respective issues across the region. I could go on, but I could speak about the awesome work that young people in our region are doing in the areas of environmental advocacy, empowering marginalized groups, increasing the calls for greater equity in our education systems, and so on. Listen, I believe that despite facing these stumbling blocks, through traditional means of advocacy, I think we, and I can include myself here, are finding ways to bring those with influence where we are and say, hey, we live here too, and our opinions matter.
Fantastic, Kev. That was a great response. You know, the one thing that I felt like you all did a really amazing job of doing is this need to connect people across the spaces, right? To create the movement, to create the momentum, I guess, for these kinds of political changes. And Kev, you really talked about environmental advocacy. You know, the colleagues Zinzi and Shaka sort of also touched on those areas. And I think one of the things I've always felt is that young people feel maybe that the institutions aren't working for the issues they're most interested in. And it does really seem that from those initial insights, the social media is a way to push those policies that young people want. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Let's go on to think about some other stuff right now. Zinzi, I'm going to come back to you here, okay? I'm thinking a little bit more about democracy and participation. So I'll just give a little bit more context to the question I'm going to ask you. So we had about 5 or 6, even 7 elections in the Caribbean region this year. What we've noticed across all those elections so far, where we have voter turnout data, is that the turnouts have dropped in all our elections. And while we don't actually have the demographic data for who didn't come out to vote, we have voting intention data. And the voting intention data for young people aged 18 to 29 came out trending quite low, that maybe they didn't want to necessarily come out and vote. But when you go and speak to young people in the communities, and obviously here, they're organizing. They're doing it at the community level. Maybe they're not doing it at the national level, but they're finding issues that are important to them. So I wanted to really throw this back to you, Zinzi, and think about, you know, learning from you, really. You know, I hear many young people say cliches like, you know, the voting doesn't really change anything for me. It doesn't really make a big difference, you know, on a national level. Could you tell me, why do you think some of the youth say they feel disconnected from democracy? And if it was up to you, say, you know, you were the person in charge, you know, what would you do to sort of try to maybe rebuild the trust that's needed for them to feel more like voting is important? Over to you, Zinzi. Thank you.
Thank you. Great question. I believe that many of us, I say us, myself included, feel disconnected from democracy because we don't see our voices reflected in the decisions being made. You know, youth may vote, but then we see little to no change in issues that matter most to us, like unemployment, education, or even inclusion, which leads to the frustration and a sense of all participation doesn't really matter. And sometimes governments say that they are creating spaces to hear the youth, but don't actually apply anything that was said, or apply very minimal things. When that happens, young people start to feel that their involvement is only for appearances, not for genuine change. That's when faith in democracy begins to fade, when participation feels symbolic rather than meaningful. For example, we have during national consultations in several Caribbean countries, like the youth parliament sessions and regional youth forums, young people share powerful recommendations on education, employment, and even inclusion. But often those ideas are not reflected in the actual policy outcomes. And oftentimes they are left in draft and rest on the desk and never looked at again. That's one of the reasons many youth start to feel that participation is symbolic rather than meaningful. And I believe to rebuild that trust, democracy has to become more participatory and youth-centered. Governments and institutions need to not just listen to youth, but act on their ideas. That means creating ongoing youth advisory bodies involving young people in monitoring the process of policies and ensuring their contributions are visible and acknowledged. You know, civic education also plays a major role. When youth understand how the system works and how to influence it, they're more likely to engage with it. So ultimately, when young people see their voices leading to real results, whether it's a new policy, a reformed law, or a successful community project even, they begin to believe again that democracy isn't just about voting, every few years. It's about continuous participation, accountability, and shared leadership. Thank you.
Hey, fantastic answers, Zinzi. Thank you so much. I think you really put that in clear terms for us all to understand. And I think you also gave us a lot of recommendations there that I 100% agree with. And I think we need to work on that bridge to make democracy more than just voting every few years and have the youth voices included in policy. And I think certain things, I see a sort of a prevention of violence of ecosystem growing around the Caribbean. And I like to say that I feel like a lot of the young people are sort of stepping forward and contributing to that. So we need to kind of keep working at that. Thank you so much, Zinzi. That was a great question. Shaka, I'm going to come to you next. I'm thinking a little bit about what you were saying and what other people have been saying about a little bit about disinformation here. Also, if you want to kind of respond a little bit to anything Zinzi said as well, please feel free. But the question I had for you here is a little bit more about critical thinking. So we know that digital space, even though it's such a great space to sort of, like a youth town hall, that it brings young people together, we also know that it spreads a lot of noise. So while it gives everyone a voice, it also spreads a lot of this kind of noise. And I wanted to throw a question to you really as a young person, Shaka. How do you personally deal with that? How do you navigate the mix of truth, disinformation, and all these opinions that are circulating online? How do you deal with it? How do you pick out the bits that you can use and understand best? Let me hear what you think about that, please. Over to you, Shaka.
So, great question. Firstly, I'd want to establish between misinformation and disinformation because I believe at times they're often confused. Disinformation is when someone intentionally creates rumors about a given topic, while misinformation is when someone unintentionally spreads disinformation. So you'd want to think of it as a process. Disinformation first and then follows misinformation. With the part that you said about the opinions, social media is a town hall where everyone is free to voice their opinion, which is a great initiative. However, when voicing your opinion, you'd want to take into consideration how it might impact others, as well as how it could influence some others' decisions. And for instance, recently there was a rumor that the Attorney General was in a safe house in Trinidad and Tobago. That caused a lot of panic in the country, and you really saw the effects it had, and with the spread of misinformation throughout the country. As a young person, you would want to use credible sources. For instance, I would use BBC News as an international resource, while I might use Guardian Media as a more localized resource as credible sources. Thank you.
Thanks, Shaka. Just wanted to follow up quickly on that because I feel like that's a really nice distinction that you made there between misinformation and disinformation, and also that you use these credible sources. Do you think that it's something that other young people that you mix with and you hang out with, they have that same kind of understanding that you do about the what's the right word, the toxicness or the dangers of those things? Or do you feel that it's not something lots of young people are aware of?
Believe that the young people are aware of it, but they don't take it into consideration all the time because sometimes they might just say the first thing that comes to their head, and I think they should take into more consideration the impacts they will have on others. So I believe they should think before they act. Thank you.
Yeah. Good statement. I agree. Thank you so much. And maybe we'll return to thinking a little bit about this in a later question. Kev, I'm going to come to you now. You've got a big question here. So, feel free to come in and answer any of those previous questions as well. The question I have for you here is, because the reason we thought of this question for you is because you're already in these spaces, you're already doing something different. So we wanted to ask you, if you could redesign the way democracy is working in the digital age, what kinds of things would you change? Maybe what would you change first? What might be some other things you might change? And maybe this kind of connects to what Zinzi and Chaka are talking about as well in terms of the misinformation. Over to you.
Listen, I think the answers that the others would have given really, at this point, I feel like as if I don't even have to answer the question. No, but seriously though, I think that Zinzi and Shaka touched on very key important points, especially as we move into a more digital age. And to contextualize it, I think we should really come back to the source. So I think as our democracies become more mature, we have to find more ways to Caribbeanize our political experience, making it more relevant for our lived experiences and realities within the region. And one of the main criticisms that the Caribbean variant of the Westminster system has is the concept of 5-second democracy, meaning that for most people, they believe that their opinion on the affairs of the day is relegated to the ballot box. You go in, you mark your X, and then you leave, only to come back and do the same thing 5 years later. We have to move towards, as Zinzi said, a more participatory democracy. And one of these ways is through the creation of a petition mechanism, where if a matter receives a certain amount of signatories, the state then is bound by law to at least give an audience to the issue in their respective legislatures. And if you get enough signatures, it can lead to further investigation and even a potential vote within that parliament. So this isn't anything necessarily new. It exists within the UK, it exists in Ireland, it exists in the US, and even within the Caribbean and Jamaica, where it can be done digitally. Early in my presentation, I spoke about the success of the Nelson Must Go movement in Barbados, which utilized this method, but did so through an independent website. And I think since we're in the era of protecting data, by creating a state-affiliated version, we can alleviate any concerns related to security and the validity of those signatories so that policymakers can then have an accurate description or depiction rather of how people are feeling about a particular topic. Our societies are dynamic and we must change with the times. And if we fail to do so, then our democracies don't necessarily have the space to grow alongside with it. We will then continue to have increased levels of apathy and frustration, which will then hurt our development for years to come.
Great point, Kev. I often think about that too, that nexus that you're describing in terms of, democracy, for good to have solid inclusive development, you need democracy, right? And have the good, good democracy, you also need that other kind of inclusive development. So the two things have to come together. But I just wanted to pick up on one thing you said, and maybe you don't have the answer to this. We gave some examples, right? Some really nice examples. And I was wondering, what do you, if you had to tell somebody what the magic ingredients are for taking something that's online successful campaign, like online advocacy that's successful, that kind of gets on the ground traction outside of the social media space. Is there any special ingredients that sort of make that happen that we should be aware of?
I think that two things. One, luck, but also timing. I think timing is very, very important. I think, as you would recognize if in your own work, Dylan, is that, it's not often what you do, but when you do it. And I think that by not only having that, but also listening to key stakeholders on the ground, I think that could be the flint, the wood, and the trash that can form a fire within that particular instance. So I think it's a combination of ensuring that you have your ears to the ground, ensuring that you read the tea leaves effectively, ensuring that, okay, we're not moving too early, we're not moving too late, and also ensuring that you have all the relevant parties in place, ensuring that, because at the end of the day, you can start hot and start really well, but you have to ensure that you plan effectively to ensure that, hey, this has legs ahead of the online initial launch, and also ensuring that you prepare for any potential stumbling blocks that happens in the way. So we've seen it, like I said, in other instances around the world through Black Lives Matter, through the Me Too movement. These are all very sophisticated. These are all very sophisticated programs which started from a general idea. Hey, I don't like this, and this needs to happen. And through careful planning, it can be executed.
Really helpful insights, Kev. I love the bit that you talked about, the sustainability, the idea that, you know, that something sophisticated can come out of these, you know, simple ideas. I think that gives us all something to hold on to. And I also liked in your previous response where you talked about the importance of developing this Caribbeanness, because I feel like in our region we have so many states and so many countries and so much vitality and history of politics and political movements. In a way, we're like a fertile ground for it, right? So it's ready to take off if we put the seeds there. Well, not the seeds, if we just, you know, cultivate and make it sustainable and work with each other. Thank you for that response, Kevin. Zinzi or Shaka, if you wanted to come back on that question about what do you think maybe is the magical ingredients that might take online advocacy into the real world space, please feel free to come in here and you're more than welcome to respond too.
I'd like to say that he highlighted some key points, and I'd like to expand that we really need to just have a connection. You have to prepare before, and you gotta make sure the youth are well informed about it before, because that is an important role to get them from the hashtags to the action. So yeah.
Fabulous. Great one. Thank you, Shaka. That's great. And also responded to something Zinzi said at the very beginning too. So I like these insights to kind of, you know, rubbing against each other to create a bit of creativity here. All right. So we're going into one last broad question here. And then after that, I'll give you a little space for closing reflections. We've got about 15 minutes left, so don't feel any time pressure. I'll probably work the other direction from Kev to Shaka to Zinzi this way, just to mix it up. So this last question is, I want all of you to respond in your own way. So the question is, digital engagement has enormous potential, but also some significant risks that we've mentioned. You know, thinking about the misinformation, but also the exclusion, right? You know, and I think you know, Zinzi talked about the importance of inclusion at the beginning. So now I'm trying to think about what can the institutions do? What can institutions, government, even, you know, civil society do to really foster safe, inclusive, and equitable online civic spaces for youth? How can we really make it, you know, something that those institutions, the governments and civil society understand? As I said, I think I might start with Kev on here and then work my way back through Shaka to Zinzi. Please go ahead, Kev.
Sure. I think that this really requires a multi-sectoral approach to ensure that, yes, we have digital engagement, but ensuring that this engagement is not only relevant, but meaningful. For example, governments need to really continue efforts in helping citizens to be more aware of what is going on, but doing so while cognizant of any challenges and adequately legislating safeguards against any misinformation and disinformation. And this also means greater involvement of youth-based organizations, whether it may be within our schools or within wider civil society, within the policy-making process, as Zindy would have mentioned earlier. On the civil society end, I think that work can really be done in amplifying youth concerns and voices from young people across the towards policymakers. So, for example, at Kev's Politics, we would have created a digital town hall called Collie Space, which saw prime ministers, diplomats, civil society actors from across CARICOM being fielded questions directly on policy, and from these young people who had burning matters ranging from the cost of taxes to travel across this region to the effectiveness of CARICOM. So, like, it's not saying that young people aren't interested. I just think that because of how, I don't want to say how slow, but because of how the time in which things mature across this region, through whatever reason, because at the end of the day, you know, we're all the same region, but there are different push and pull factors which may cause persons to become involved. I think that, you know, young people are still very much interested. And I think that in order for our democracies to grow and become relevant towards the next generation of Caribbean citizens, I really can't stress this enough. We have to meet each other where we are so that our policies are more representative of all stakeholders within our societies.
Great response, Kevin. I really appreciate that nuance. Thanks for bringing that. We're meeting each other where we are. Those connections. We're going back to that idea that we're more powerful together. Really, really helpful stuff. Thank you so much. Shaka, I'm gonna pass it over to you now. Same sort of question. Same sort of genre. Anything you want to add? Sort of thinking about the potential that we're talking about digital engagement. That it is a strength. That it is a town hall. That it does these things. But obviously, it has these risks. And how can we make institutions and governments and civil society help to foster these safe, inclusive, and equitable online civic spaces for young people? Over to you, Shaka. Thanks.
So I must say, good question, right? So firstly, I'd like to deal with the inclusive and equitability part of the question, right? So in Trinidad, I know for sure that the libraries, as well as the libraries in school, are free. And I believe that deals with the inclusive part because, say for instance, some student needs to do their assignment where research would need to be done. They may not have access to it at home, not access to the internet and a computer at home. So the libraries are put there in place. And I believe that's a good initiative that has been done by the government, and I believe it should be followed by others watching on. Secondly, the welfare part of it. I know for sure that in US and China, they ban the hurtful comments and stuff, which is a good initiative because it helps everyone to truly understand the fact that they can't put so much negativity out there into the world because you never know how it would impact the person that you're giving the comment to. And because some people might take the negativity as motivation to do better, while others might take it as they might internalize it and it could break them and truly impact them. Lastly, with the institution and governments, I believe the government, they should include digital literacy because as a young person, seeing that social media is our town hall, that everyone would want to learn how to use it responsibly and inclusively because that is our way to connect with each other. So I believe digital literacy is a very important part. Thank you.
Great response, Saka. Really enjoyed that. I love libraries too. I always feel like this is an underestimated part of our ecosystem. We can never forget that libraries really are such a haven of safety in a world where there's so much kind of chaos. And, I agree that it gives you access to online spaces, but there's also other people there who can help you and support you. So great one. And I also felt like that digital literacy, so important, right? So important. I feel that if I was a young person still today and I was thrown into this digital world, that I'm not really sure what I would do, right? I don't know the skills that I would have compared to that I have now as an older person. So, really important to hear those spaces. And I think you did a nice job of also making us remember that online spaces exist and they're really powerful, but they translate into offline worlds, right? And those two things are part of this conundrum that we're talking about. So thank you for taking the time to think about that so deeply. Zinzi, I'm going to come to you with a similar reflection on that question. Do you want me to repeat the question again, or you feel comfortable to go?
No, that's fine.
Okay.
So it's funny how Shaka mentioned digital literacy because that was my first point. Digital literacy is essential. You see, young people need the skills to fact check information, even to safeguard their privacy and engage respectfully online. I believe that government should also invest in affordable internet access and assistive technologies, ensuring that youth in rural areas and those with disabilities aren't left behind in digital participation. Civil society can play a major role by creating safe, moderated online spaces where young people can freely express ideas, share lived experiences, and also collaborate across islands. Meanwhile, digital platforms and policymakers must enforce stronger online safety laws and anti-harassment measures to protect young users. And most importantly, youth themselves should be co-designers of these spaces, not just participants. When young people are part of shaping the digital rules and structures, the result is a space that reflects their realities, one that's creative, inclusive, and truly empowering for all. So that is my response to that question. Thank you.
Z, fantastic response. Thank you so much. Just to remind listeners and viewers, we're talking about digital literacy, safety online, the need for, laws, anti-harassment laws, affordable internet, accessible internet in our areas, rural areas, down the islands, in different places where it's hard to get connectivity, safe, moderated online spaces, a similar point made by our colleagues Shaka and also Kev, collaboration across islands, and nations. I think that's fundamental to everything we're talking about and really takes us to the next level. And loved your point about youth as co-designers. And it reminded something you said to me at the beginning about representation for, people with disabilities. And it's really nothing for us without us, right? The young people are saying the same thing as that, long-standing statement that our colleagues in the disabled communities often use. It's really exciting to hear you put that so clearly. So thank you very much for that, Zinzi. All right, guys, we're coming to near the end of this discussion and dialogue, and I wish we could continue. This is kind of stuff I could talk about for ages. In terms of reflecting back, we've talked about, the inclusion. We've talked about, I've tried to push this idea of kind of empowering the youth a little bit. You've talked about responsible digital engagement. We talked a lot about collaboration with the youth and more, institutions. You've given us little ideas. If we could ask you to give us like one takeaway message, one thing, if you were the person that can make anything happen or have a recommendation to make this all better, what would that takeaway message be? Shaka, I'm thinking of coming to you first here for a little takeaway message, if you don't mind. And, it can be anything you want, anything you've said, you want to repeat, or something new that we haven't discussed, or maybe the topic for the next thing we need to talk about. Just let us know what you think your main takeaway is or recommendation. Over to you, Shaka.
Thank you. So from this meeting, I've taken away that social media is a tool, and it's all about how you use it, because you could use it for both good and bad. You could use it to motivate as well as to demotivate others. And you would always want to be responsible when on social media and when using it, because there's a lot of disinformation, opinions, and other stuff that could impact. So you always want to take that into consideration. Thank you.
Zinzi, I'm going to come to you next, since I didn't put you in the middle of the guys yet. So your turn to give us a recommendation or a takeaway message. Anything you want to leave viewers and listeners with to think about. Thank you.
I would like to say, as young people, we're not just the leaders of tomorrow. We're leaders right now. Across the Caribbean, youths are proving that when given the space, the tools, and the trust, we can shape policies, challenge inequality, and drive meaningful change. But for that to happen, our voices can't just be heard, they must be acted upon. And my hope is that we continue building a region where every young person, regardless of ability or background, can participate fully in shaping a more inclusive, just, and sustainable Caribbean, especially when it comes to the digital space. Thank you.
Zinzi, it's a real pleasure having you and talking to you today on this dialogue. Thank you so much for thinking it through and giving us such great responses. Really appreciate it. Kev, I'm going to come to you with the similar kind of last thoughts. What's one takeaway message or one recommendation or something important you would like to leave us with today?
I hate Shaka and Zinzi said everything. No, I think that I believe that, Dylan, you would have mentioned, for example, waning participation among young people in our political space, in electoral politics and whatnot. But I think this session this afternoon is a testament of the fact that because persons aren't necessarily voting, that doesn't mean that they're interested. I think as we continue to advance as Caribbean societies and our greater Caribbean civilization, I think that we need to ensure that, as Shaka and Zinzi perfectly said, not only give our young people the tools to ensure that they're not only literate, but also have full understanding of civics and understanding of their place within society, but also doing so recognizing that at the end of the day, that baton has to be handed to the generation. At the end of the day, Zinzi could be the next prime minister of Grenada. Shaka could be the next attorney general of Trinidad. So like, at the end of the day, we have to be we should not be, not say we shouldn't be concerned, but it's not crisis. It's just ensuring that we have to put measures in place as the older youths among us and also those who are older than us to keep facilitating platforms for young people like Shaka and Zinzi, for example, and myself, to at least continue the conversation, getting mobilized, and connecting our communities together to ensure that we live in a society that is adequately representative of everything that we want and our hopes and aspirations for our countries to be.
Great message, Kevs. And also really appreciate you kind of pointing it out, how, that the young people are there, they want to lead, they want to be included, they want to learn, they want the promises, that the society has for them to come true. And I just think that we've heard a real kind of breadth of different things, or different statements, different views on really what's happening in the digital space. The people are online, that they are engaged, that they are aware of the negatives and the dangers out there, but they do see the possibilities of this future. And Kev, I think you said something really well. This is not a crisis. This is a situation where we need to move forward with all these positives that we have, with these fantastic young people that, we saw a little representation of, because it sounds to me like we have the answers here among us, and we need to work together to really take it further. With that, I just want to say thank you to everybody, and thank you for listening. Thank you for tuning in, and we hope to see you again soon. All the best. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.